Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Dan Lanning, the Oregon Ducks. It was maybe a little bit more of a quiet offseason than we're used to since Dan Lanning has gotten to Eugene. But the thing with the offseason that Dan Lanning Oregon had, it wasn't about the quantity of new faces that are coming in. It's about the quality in the certain positions that Oregon went out and addressed in the offseason. Now, as the dust settles from spring practice, who are the five most important new faces coming into this program going into 2025? And this conversation excites me because, one, it was kind of hard to whittle this one down to five, and I think our list of fives going to be a little bit different. I think the second thing that most excites me is the whole conversation with Oregon this offseason, like how do we get over the hump? The players that we talk about over the next 15, 20 minutes, to me, are the players that are going to be playing a massive role in Oregon having the opportunity to get over the hump in 2025. Fired up to get into this conversation. Before we do, and as always, to the Oregon Duck fans, y'all let it fly in the comment section. Just drop the top five. In your opinion, who are the five new faces that will have the biggest impact on this Oregon football team in 2025? Appreciate you guys rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Dill, without further ado, before we get into our top five list, you haven't really talked a ton of Oregon in terms of offseason moves. I'm going to give you the T-box. Like, what's your biggest takeaway? How would you evaluate what Dan Lanning, the Oregon Ducks, have done in the offseason this year?
And I think you said it. And I think it's a good sign that it was a little bit more quiet, frankly, because you've seen the last couple of cycles and earlier in Dan Lanning's tenure at Oregon, he had to be more aggressive. He was adding more names. And we talked about it. Like, there were some position groups, like they added a bunch of guys, not a ton of difference makers. I think you look like the safety room's the one that obviously jumps out. Didn't add a ton to that back end. It was Kennedy and Dillon Thieneman, but Dillon Thieneman's going to be a guy to me who makes a huge difference in this team. He has the athleticism, the range, the size, things that Oregon frankly lacked very greatly last year. So again, they didn't add a ton of guys, but they were able to add some really high quality players at spots of need. But I think at the end of the day, this Oregon team's just, it's a little bit more loaded in terms of talent and depth than it has been in the past.
Yeah, I think the way to sum up, I think, what you're saying here is that look at what they've done at the high school ranks the last couple of years. They did not need to go out and get 20 new names in the portal because they have the talent already built in that pipeline. Now, the first couple of years Dan Lanning got to Oregon, that pipeline wasn't necessarily there. So you saw a little bit more of a reliance on the transfer portal to get the ball rolling. Now you don't have to rely. Look, Dan Lanning is going to use the transfer portal because he's going to look to make this roster as good as possible. Like you said, the fact that it wasn't 20 new players coming into this program, that tells me what Oregon thinks of all this young talent on this roster. And I've already seen it, quite frankly, in the national media. Like, there's a lot of people talking about the NFL draft picks that Oregon lost and how much production they need to replace going into 2025. And it's like, okay, we get that you aren't familiar with the name Aaron Flowers or a guy like Ife Obadegwu. You make no mistake about it. These are very, very good football players that maybe the national media does not know yet. Come early mid-October, they're going to be talking about these cats in a little bit of a different way. Now, here's where the fun conversation gets into. You only got to take five. Who are the players that have the biggest impact? And let's just start with number one. To me, it's Dakorien Moore. I know this is a little bit of a hot take here, talking about a true freshman arguably having the biggest impact on this football team out of any new faces coming in because they landed some difference makers in the portal. Here's my argument for Dakorien Moore is, number one, we thought the world of this kid coming out of high school. Checks just about every single box you're looking for. We got that verified during spring practice. All we ever heard about from Dakorien Moore in spring practice, his kid's a playmaker. He opens up the offense in ways that Oregon maybe didn't have available to them in the 2024 season. And then I look at, all right, like what what allows Oregon to get over the hump? I think it's having that true difference maker on the outside that when it's a big moment in a big game, you have a guy that can go out and win. Ohio State had it with Jeremiah Smith last year. Michigan had it with Colston Loveland at tight end. Georgia had it with Brock Bowers. Alabama had it with Devontae Smith. All these national championship teams have that kind of guy. I don't think it's crazy that Dakorien Moore can be that guy for Oregon as a true freshman.
And that was because that was one of the things I had an issue with, frankly. And when we talk about where maybe the holes are with Oregon, one of mine was that wide receiver spot. Like, I thought you lost Tez Johnson. He was certainly that guy last year. He was that dependable force in that unit. Evan Stewart, I still think needs to prove it, frankly. And now you get Dakorien Moore into this room, and I do think you feel pretty good about. I mean, again, what you saw in the spring game, what we got to see, what obviously was reported, you might have a guy who, again, yeah, he's young, but if you have that guy, I do think you're right. That is a prerequisite. I'm not sure they necessarily would have had it without.
Now I'm kind of out on this conversation of like, oh, he's 17, 18-year-old kid. Don't have too high of expectations. Screw that. I just saw a bunch of true freshmen really get it done in the 2024 year. You talk about guys like Jeremiah Smith, Ryan Williams, Cam Coleman, the two cats at Clemson. This is a position where you can come in and have an immediate impact. And I think Dakorien Moore is one of those special guys who can do that. Last year, the wide receiver one was Tez. And the Oregon fans know, like, that you ain't going to find a bigger fan of Tez Johnson than myself. He was limited. Like, there was a reason he was not a first-round NFL draft pick. Dakorien Moore, if he becomes the player we know he can be, if he can become the player that we heard he has been in spring practice, he's top 15 NFL draft pick and a legitimate difference maker immediately for this Oregon offense. He's one of those high upside guys that gets you over the hump. Dill, number two, and really could be number one. I think you had him number one, Dillon Thieneman. We both love this kid. I'll give you the T-box here. The level of importance for Dillon Thieneman coming into Oregon.
And you talked about a guy they just didn't have last year. Like, watching that Ohio State game, you saw, like, not fast enough, no range in the back end. They need a guy in the middle of the field who can run with top-end players. Dillon Thieneman, I mean, he is really that guy. So you talk about, like, one of those moves that kind of moves Oregon much more forward, if you will, with kind of one guy. I think he kind of is it because they just didn't have this type of athleticism in their back end.
And I would even say, like, the command this kid has over the football field at the safety spot is special. There's two massive impacts that I think Dillon has. One, he's an All-American caliber safety. That was a position Oregon struggled with. So you're adding an All-American caliber player at a position you needed to address coming out of 2024. Number one. Number two, inarguably, the most important role Dillon Thieneman's going to have is he's going to be the glue. I mean, he's only going to be a junior. He's only going into his third year of college football. There are not many players across the country that have played as much football as this kid over the last 2 years. You look at this Oregon secondary, and I'm already starting to hear you talk about the national media narrative around this team. They have to replace everybody in the back end of this defense. That's not a bad thing. Like, I think there are a lot of guys, young talent on this team that are going to be asked to step into starting roles that I think will be better football players than Oregon had in the 2024 year.
Well, guys, like, again, you can't, your whole secondary can't be under 6 feet tall and not moving.
Yeah, 100%. The athletic profile.
You look at the new corners, like, all big, all athletic. Like, again, it just is going to look a lot different. And frankly, it's going to look the way I think it needs to look if you're going to win at a really high level. If you look down a team like Ohio State.
Chris Hampton talked about it. He's like, we finally, this offseason, he said, we finally have the bodies that we were looking for in the back end. Talking like 6'1 plus, sub 11 in the 100-meter dash. Like, these are the profiles Dan Lanning wants. But here's my point. The only concern you have, it's not the talent. The talent is massive in this Oregon secondary. It's probably the deepest cornerback room we see in the country. The concern you have, it's going to be a lot of players that haven't played a ton of football at the collegiate ranks. What a blessing it is to have a guy like Dillon Thieneman in the back end that can bring this secondary together. Like, his impact on this Oregon defense is not just going to be as an individual football player. It's going to be as the glue to this Oregon secondary that's young and inexperienced. Having that guy, I think, is going to have a massive impact on this Oregon secondary as a whole. Number 3, and Dill, let's just like lump in all the offensive line additions: Isaiah World, Alex Harkey, Emmanuel Pregnon. January. Take us back to January. I was looking at this Oregon team after they lost to Ohio State, and we're like, hey, they're going to be good in 2025. There ain't no question mark about that. What are your biggest concerns? Offensive line, like in a big time way. We didn't really know what it was going to look like specifically at tackle. We're coming out of spring practice and saying, all right, the consensus word coming out of the program is we love our tackles going into 2025. Isaiah World, Alex Harkey, 2 guys we think can be NFL dudes. The conversation for me has gone from, is this Oregon offensive line going to be a liability when we were like in early January before they landed these additions? Now the conversation for me sitting here in early May is this offensive line a better unit than it was in the 2024 year? That is certainly possible. And if you get that for Oregon in 2025, again, just more wind at the sails pushing this team to a national championship.
And the one thing I look at is you kind of know they're going to be physical and be able to run the football. And that, to me, that's why I kind of had Mekhi Hughes, I think, kind of on this list too, in my mind, as kind of
I
a
like
higher
that one.
impact guy. Because I still look, as much as Oregon was pretty effective through the air, their ability to run the ball for the past couple of years has been huge. And I think that offensive line's been able to be physically imposing and beat teams up. Again, you certainly can have your questions about the pass protection from the tackles because you just haven't seen them have to go against top-end pass rushers pretty consistently. But I look, both really, really physical. And I don't even mean to say that to doubt what they're going to do in the pass pro, but I look at a bare minimum. I think with Pregnon, World, and Harkey coming in, along with obviously Poncho at center, you're going to have a really, really physical offensive line that's going to move guys around.
100%. And one of the things you're looking for is Oregon to run the football in the big games against the best teams in the country. You know, I think Jordan James had 7 carries for 14 yards in the Rose Bowl, and he was their leading rusher. Now,
and the defense's fault a little bit.
Yes, I agree. But when you get into the, like, what made Michigan so special in 2023, there wasn't a defense they couldn't run the football against. Like, they could always lean on the run game when they wanted to. I think Oregon's going to be there in 2025. We'll skip ahead. I had Mekhi Hughes at 5, but we can talk about him now. I'll start with this. The transfer portal ranking on this kid is whack. There ain't 9 better running backs in the transfer portal than Mekhi Hughes. He's done it for 2 straight years at Tulane. Looks the part. I mean, he looks like an action figure. This is a guy that, I don't want to get up here and like say he's like an upgrade from Bucky or an upgrade from Jordan James. The thing I love about Mekhi the best is he's a multi-dimensional cat. You know, very similar to Jordan James. I think Jordan James got that stigma of like he's a short yardage back that can't really run at the second level. That wasn't true. Jordan James was very, very good. Mekhi Hughes, very similar as well. He's a guy that at 5'11", 210 plus pounds, like he can get it done in those nitty-gritty situations. When he gets to the second level, big time shake, big time ability to make people miss. The long speed maybe isn't elite, but he has the ability to hit bigger plays behind an offensive line. Though the reason I had him at 5, quite frankly, is I just like the running back room in general. Like, even if you didn't have Mekhi Hughes, I think they were going to be pretty damn good at the running back.
See, that's why I kind of had him a little higher, because I thought, like, in terms of pure importance, like, you need a guy who you can just dependably churn yards out.
Yeah,
and
fair.
As much as Mekhi Hughes, you said, probably the one issue you might have with him is long speed. He is a guy who, again, just kind of churns yards. I mean, he is able to make a 2-yard carry into a 5-yard carry, and it's just an important part of what Oregon's been doing for the last
especially when you're having a quarterback in what we think is going to be Dante Moore, where you don't want to have him feel the need to put the Superman cape on all the time. Like, you're trying to look, you want Dante Moore to make big time throws. That's why Dante Moore, I think, is going to be the starter for this Oregon offense, but you don't want him to have to be forcing it. Well, if you're in 2nd and 5 instead of 2nd and 8, if you're in 3rd and 3 as opposed to 3rd and 7, maybe it gets the best out of that. You give Dante Moore a run game, and you don't ask him to put the team on his back every single snap like he had to at UCLA. That's going to be the best thing for that kid. Dill, we got to talk about Bear. And I know you don't agree with me here, and you have your question marks about Bear, and I think that's fair. man, the flashes that we saw from this kid in 2023, it's all Big Ten. It's all Big Ten caliber. It's top 100 NFL draft pick caliber. Quite frankly, I don't think it's crazy to, I don't know if expect is the right word, but to say, hey, this could be the case that we get a Derek Harmon type impact from a guy like Bear Alexander in 2025. And the thing that makes me feel so good about it, this is the most consistency this kid has had arguably during his football playing career, right? Was at 4 different high schools in 4 different years at the high school ranks, obviously bounced around from Georgia to USC, now to Oregon. He got to Oregon in January. It's been radio silence from this kid. The only thing you're hearing is he's coming, he's been a model teammate, and he's been working hard. What you get another 3 months of Bear Alexander like that, just putting his head down and maximizing himself. What he can be in 2025 excites me in a big time way going into the 2025 year.
And I get that. To me, the reason I do think their defensive line, I feel pretty good about it for the most part. Like I love the young talent coming up to the pipeline. So to me, Bear Alexander's a little bit more of like a lotto ticket in the sense that if it hits, it's going to be awesome and it's a huge, huge thing. But I don't know that he was as necessary, let's say, as Dillon Thieneman. Like Dillon Thieneman to me is like a guy they just didn't have. I don't think they had necessarily an easy answer on this roster. Bear Alexander, has not played at the level of Dillon Thieneman in terms of what he's done.
Yeah.
And yeah, again, like you can't overlook the lack of consistency through the college.
100%.
Because even on the field with USC, it just wasn't consistent enough. There were some games early where that's not particularly great football. And you said it, there have been some flashes, and he is a great athlete and a really explosive interior defensive lineman who can be disruptive. I think Oregon's brought in a lot of guys who you just are almost like don't have any questions. Like they're going to come in and be really effective.
Okay, so here's where I disagree. Here's where, and this has nothing to do. I feel like when you're talking about these young defensive linemen, like I'm fired up for them too, 100%. I'm looking at, you cannot have enough of these kind of football players if you want to go win a national championship. Going back to the overarching conversation around this Oregon team, it's not how do we win 10 games. It's not how do we compete for a Big Ten championship. It's how do we become the best team in the country in the month of January. Go look at Ohio State last year. Go look at Michigan in 2023. Hell, go look at the Georgia Bulldogs in the early 2020s. They had a ton of these dudes. And if Oregon gets over the hump, they need to be elite on the defensive line. They need to be deep on the defensive line. If you get Bear Alexander, a maximized Bear Alexander, which I think you're going to get, because this is, again, by far the most consistency this kid has had as an individual during his football playing career. If you get that, that's why I was so excited about this kid when he committed to Oregon in the winter. It's like it's a really good situation. I think Oregon has put themselves in a spot where they have the culture to bring Bear Alexander in, get the best out of him.
And see, I don't doubt that. Like, I think the landing spot was awesome. I think because the fact that Dan Lanning definitely knows about him from the Georgia days, so he can probably and just know if it's going to work or have a better sense than if it was just kind of like coming in cold out of the portal, let's say. I think to boost Bear Alexander above even like a guy like Jaden Kennedy, who to me is a huge piece for this Oregon team.
I don't think he plays that much.
His versatility in the back end, because he actually can play man coverage. He can play zone. He can play on the boundary or in the nickel. I think he is going to play at that nickel spot a fair amount personally.
Okay, he might.
I'm a huge Jaden Kennedy fan. I thought he did a great job for Ole Miss. I just think, again, to take Bear, because you got to see something different than what you've seen for his whole college career if he is going to make that list to me for Oregon, just because Oregon, again, they didn't bring in a zillion guys in the portal, but the guys they brought in, I think, are all mostly going to be difference makers for him. So it's not like as much.
I think that's why you bring him in, though, because he has the potential too. There's no question about it. This ain't a guy that's like here. There's like a difference between Bear Alexander and Jamari Caldwell. You bring in Jamari Caldwell, he was very good for Oregon. We kind of knew he was going to be that guy. The upside on Bear Alexander, I think, is very, very high. And if you're Dan Lanning, you can afford to take that risk. Okay, if Bear Alexander doesn't work out, he's just a
I don't even
rotational.
disagree though with I think like in terms of pure impact guys, I have a hard time putting them up as high as you have because
Yeah.
the other guys are impact guys, but they're a lot more defined, I think, in terms of what they're going to give this organization.
Yeah, well, I think we could be talking about Bear Alexander in the top 3. You know, with the upside that he gives. It's a little bit of a projection, but I mean,
A huge projection.
I think he can give you the impact Derek Carman gave you last year. And Derek Carman was, in my opinion, like, outside of probably Dillon Gabriel, the most important addition Oregon made last year. I think Bear Alexander can play and have an impact in a very similar way.
You just saw it.
I'll throw
from Derek Carman.
I'll
You knew
throw
Derek
in
Carman was coming in.
Trey McNutt too at safety. I think he's probably going to play. I think he looks a little bit different from the other safeties they had. Well, that's probably not super fair to say, but I think Trey McNutt's going to play. We'll get out of here on that. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. We'll talk to y'all later.